At 1:46 a.m. on September 23rd, Daniel Ricciardo exited the F1 paddock for the last time as an F1 driver. The whole night was something bizarre and heartbreaking. F1 farewelling a driver who has not yet been announced as officially leaving. Speculation? No, Daniel was in no doubt of his future, and neither was the rest of the paddock. And there were plenty of tears. Well, going back to Thursday Media Day, the whole of the paddock expected Daniel Ricciardo to be officially announced as leaving Red Bull, to be replaced by Liam Lawson, but that never came. All weekend he was delicately dancing around questions from the media about what was happening. But he couldn't say anything, and Red Bull didn't say anything. So come Sunday, race time, still no announcement. Daniel takes to the grid for the very last time as an F1 driver. The red lights go out just after 8 p.m. Daniel completes the 62 laps of the Singapore GP, brings the car home in one piece, was the last of the finishing drivers, and gets voted Driver of the Day. Some of you said Driver of the Decade. Sentimental vote. People knew that he was leaving the sport. They wanted to reward him with that. After the race, he sat in his car for some time, soaking up what he knew was his last race. And it's worth noting too that Daniel set the fastest lap. Why? Well, because Christian Horner asked him to do it for Max Verstappen's sake, and Max is a good friend of Daniel's. He said yes, and that denied Lando Norris the opportunity to score one extra point, which would have made it a little bit easier perhaps for Lando to catch Max in the World Drivers' Championship. And then he headed down to the TV media pen with no shirt on, just his cooling vest, and I can tell you it was stinking hot, and that was probably all he needed. He then stayed for probably one of the longest sessions I've ever encountered with a driver in the media pen. He talked to every single person that wanted to speak to him, and sometimes for 15 minutes. He was happy and smiley for most of those interviews, but that's his nature. But in some interviews he was close to tears. Next up, it was off to Sky UK for a chat with their crew, and among other things he acknowledged that leaving the sport happens to all of us, and maybe that at 35, with the competition getting better, he was just not cutting it. He did say it was exhausting, but he was grateful for the opportunity to get into F1. It was his dream, having the chance to fight for wins. He said he didn't want to look back and be negative, and then asked what he might do. He said, maybe I'll go out and climb mountains. And then Sky played a highlights reel, but unfortunately they didn't get the reaction from Daniel they wanted because they don't think he could hear the audio. But remember, at this point, he's not been announced as leaving the sport. Red Bull have said nothing. Why? No one knows. A couple of people told me that Helmut wants him out, but Christian wants him still to be around. One thing's for sure, it's not a good look, and I think a lot of you agree with me that Red Bull did him dirty on this. They hung him out to dry. The whole weekend he was dancing around these questions, and it was awkward to watch. And Daniel's a beautiful guy with a big heart, but unfortunately he was left to field all of these questions without much support from Red Bull, I thought. And what of his successor, Liam Lawson? Well, I had a quick chat with him over the weekend, and he said, look, it's just frustrating for me. But rest assured, Liam will be in that car come the Austin Grand Prix. After the Sky interview, he walked back to the hospitality suite, and there was a little bit of a guard of honour either side of the walkway up to the hospitality suite, and they all clapped him as he came in. He was fist bumping and high-fiving people. And then he was behind closed doors for quite some time. Now at this stage, my son and I had rotated shifts waiting out the front of the hospitality suite because we wanted to document what goes on when a driver leaves the sport. Just after midnight, Lando Norris came down to see Daniel. They caught up behind closed doors in the back of the V-Carb garage. Was there any media in there? Yeah, Netflix. Well, if they weren't in there, they were very close, and I imagine this will be a gut-wrenching, heartbreaking episode to watch come March next year or February, whenever they air it. About 10 minutes later, I reckon, Lando came out, left the paddock, and at that point, that left Daniel as the only driver, as far as I could tell, still left in the paddock. And this is getting quite late. Yuki went into the garage, Laurent Mekies went into the garage, they both came out, and then eventually Daniel too emerged with his manager Blake and went back into the hospitality suite. More hugs, more tears, and then it was upstairs for a time, and a goodly long time, and at that point I got the feeling that Daniel just didn't want to leave. Maybe he had a late flight, I can't tell you exactly, but it was a bizarre thing to witness what was going on to a lovely fella. When he finally came down, he popped out to the kitchen to say thank you to the crew out there, and then walked out to where we were standing. And I remember vividly in Monza, I'd spoken to his dad after he'd won the race, And his dad said, give Daniel a hug from me. And I said, oh, Daniel, your dad sends you a hug. And he came back up the stairs and gave me a hug, which I thought was lovely at the time. And I mentioned that to Daniel and I said, I owe you a hug. Because at that point, he was hugging everyone. So I did get a hug from the great man and he posed for a photo with my son and myself. And then 3 fans collared him for a selfie and he took his cap off, signed it and gave it to one of those fans as if to say, I'm not walking out with this on, even though he had the shirt on. He said, no, you can have the hat. And then I watched him walk down to the exit of the paddock. And as he was nearly out of the paddock, he turned around and looked over his shoulders. And then as he's about to step outside the paddock for the final time, looked up at some signage above. I then raced around in front. And mind you, while this is all going on, there are forklifts coming backwards and forwards. It's not the sort of exit you would have hoped for as a Formula One driver. Pretty much last person out of there, no one around, just a couple of cameras. But these were my final shots of Daniel as he left the track last night in Singapore. This being my final shot of Daniel as an F1 driver. So what now for Daniel? Well, in the next week or so, I imagine he'll go back to Australia and he will just sit there and wait for Red Bull to decide when they're going to announce that Daniel is no longer driving for them. I'm sure if you're a fan of Daniel's or even just a decent person, you too would have wanted Daniel to go out on a high note where he could have said thank you to everyone, where everybody was in no doubt that this was his last drive, perhaps even doing donuts on the track to celebrate a stellar F1 career. Instead, there was no fanfare. It was just him and his manager at 1:46 a.m. leaving the Singapore Grand Prix paddock. Now, on to different things from the Singapore Grand Prix. Ollie Behrman and Kimi Antonelli having a bit of fun with the fans, where Ollie got hold of a marker pen and decided he'd sign Kimi's hat. He had no idea. In fact, even later in the afternoon when I saw Kimi, and I mentioned to him that he discovered the signature on his cap, he said no. He was going back to have a look. Another thing, Ollie Behrman cannot make an omelette. I know this because he crossed this box from this fan's poster. Franco Colapinto, yes, he signed 100 prints. So what signature do you think you should use?
I think you should make sure that you start doing the same signature for
No,
everyone.
to everyone I'm doing this one because the other one is too long, you know.
This is what people will know in years to come, so I think that's probably the best.
I think I should
Just the FC.
Yeah. Kimi Räikkönen's just that. He just waves the pen at it.
Okay.
That's it. And I take a photo and people go, oh, that's my picture.
Am I yellow?
You look really yellow.
The quality is really nice. Here is 50 more.
50 more. So this is better accommodation than F2.
Oh.
Hola.
¿Qué pasa?
We have quite a production line going.
Ay, they're massive, qué guay.
How about this, Franco? Could you sign this one
Yeah?
for me,
Yeah?
but with your left hand over here?
With my left?
Left hand. I ask every driver to sign left and right-handed.
So,
It's difficult. He's signing with his left hand.
hang on. I never did this.
Very tricky.
It's the first time.
Yeah.
Hang on.
Hola, Santiago.
Bam!
Bien, ¿cómo estás?
And the 43. Well, this is impossible.
If you'd like one of these Franco Colapinto hand-signed and numbered prints, go to the shop at kimillman.com and click on Sign Prints and select from the numbers still available. Let's get on to Ted Kravitz now. You might have heard that he let slip with the F word on one of their telecasts.
But it also improves the. Sorry, let's do that again.
Now, you might have thought that was live. Well, I can tell you it was not live. And I think Ted has been pretty much hard done by here. The story was he was filming, and I know this from him, we chatted. He was filming a segment out in pit lane, this segment here, when he made a mistake and he said the F word. You should listen to my outtakes on my... It's littered with profanity, but I'm not airing it to you on purpose, and neither did Ted do it live. It was a recorded piece, and a short time later they went to play it back. But they played back the wrong take. So Ted has to come out and apologise for something that was never meant to be aired. Now I imagine back at their headquarters, whoever played that vision has probably been given a good ass kicking. But if you're upset with Ted for that, I think you need to rethink things because it wasn't meant to be heard. Max Verstappen swearing in the press conference, well, that's a different matter. But I did think that his reactions at the press conference on Saturday night were hilarious, where he was just giving one-word answers at best and pretty much chopping things off. And I was actually coming back to the media centre when I saw Lando Norris after the press conference come out, so I thought, I'll take some pics, and I walked backwards and took some pics of Lando. And then I went to go back to the media centre and Max came out, but this time he had a whole lot of journalists around him, and that's something we very rarely see, journalists flocking to a driver. So I photographed that for a bit, and at that point I realised that there was something controversial. I didn't know what. Oftentimes we just shoot and have blind disregard as to what's going on. It wasn't until I got up to the media centre that my son told me, oh yeah, he protested. I mentioned to him the next day that I thought he was spot on, and I liked his style. And he did answer all the questions that he wanted to answer in the press conference, but it was his way of showing the FIA that he wasn't impressed. Now, on another matter of this photo here, this is a shot taken out at a bus stop, and it's done by using a reflection on the underside of a ceiling. Now, I've seen this shot taken for many years now, and I decided to go and have a crack at it, and I thought it was okay. And then a friend of mine, good friend of mine, Clive Mason, put a post up on his Instagram page, and he got this comment: "I think the photographer was Kim Illman, ? To which Clive responded, "Sorry, I don't understand what your comment refers to." The writer went on to say, "That's Kim's photo," to which Clive responded, "Watch his video." So if you're watching this video, I can tell you that this is Clive on the left and a colleague of his, Glenn Dunbar, on the right. They found this shot going back, was it 2016 or 14? I did hear and forgot. And they were both on a Wednesday night prior to a race weekend. They both said, let's come back in FP2 and shoot this. Well, Clive came back in FP1 and got the jump on Glenn, but certainly this is not a new photo, and definitely that is Clive's photo. But he was funny in the media centre telling me, one of your fans has had a crack at me. Rest at ease, people. Miles Chamley-Watson, the fencer, had a beautiful piece of jewellery on. He is an Olympic fencer, and he has the Olympic rings around his neck. And two final stories from what was a hot and hard weekend in tropical heat. These two girls from Australia were camped out the front of the swipe gates along with a couple of hundred other fans, and they grabbed the attention of drivers with this sign. And did any driver blow them a kiss? Yes, two. Well, one F1 driver and one soon-to-be F1 driver, and Nico Hulkenberg and Liam Lawson. I said to Nico, you're one of two drivers, and he said, who was the other one? So I told him Liam, and I said the same to Liam, and he said, well, they were Australian, so pretty much close enough to New Zealand that he stopped and blew them a kiss. And finally, Fernando Alonso doesn't often sign stuff at the track. He tends to just wave and walk past fans. But he did stop for one woman, and I went up and had a chat to her afterwards and said, why you? And she said, I was wearing this cap. Now, this is a cap from his early years, and one of my Instagram followers says it looks like a Minardi 2001 cap from the colours when Fernando debuted with them. So the secret is, if you want to get Fernando's attention and perhaps get something signed, go back into his past and find something that he perhaps holds dear. Now, before you go and order one of those Franco Colapinto prints, could you please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so. And for a whole lot of extra content and merchandise, that's where you need to look. Thanks for watching.
And stay passionate!
What is that thing?
Let me record something. Look at me.